problems in Eternal, and 4 exclusive deck lists. Let's talk about it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 71 of FECast, where we're going to be talking about the new set, Revelations, and the problems it brought along with it, and also the good stuff. Along with me to talk about it, of course, is my co-host and fellow Worlds 2020 competitor, Stormblessed. How are you doing, Stormblessed?
I'm doing very well. We got a fun new set. I've been sort of we'll just get in discussion what's going on, but trying to carve out some fun segment along with all these obviously insane things that you can do in the new set, especially in Throne.
Yeah, the new set's been pretty cool. I think that it really opens up the game in a way that is different from how the game's been played before. And whether that's a good or bad thing, I mean, that, is something to be debated, of course, but
Yes.
it's always good to be seeing a new aspect of the game being uncovered, 10 or 11 or however many sets in we are now.
But before we jump right into talking about the new set and all the cool things we think are going on with it, or not all of them, but some of them, because there's a lot of cool things going on. It's a very cool set. We just want to make a note that we'll put out a thing on Twitter saying that there will be a new patch mid next week, some sort of balance patch. So it might be addressing some of the problems, hopefully buffing some other cards as Direwolf does. And of course, the new patch will impact specifically Suny coming up very soon is his TNE Invitational spot. So, whatever happens in this balance patch might change what deck Suny ends up bringing, or, change the format if Suny also wants to change the decks, as well as will obviously change the Throne Open itself. That will affect the rest of us.
So I think you could say that this is the first of the problems that we're going to be talking about today, because apparently when they released Revelations, some of the cards were changed. Like, for example, you have Azendel's Khaleesi being factionless, and Dovid discarded cards instead of putting them on the bottom of the deck. So that was very strange, to say the least. And after a lot of prodding on Twitter, I think Ilya gave them many, many earfuls. And eventually they said that those cards were being tested for some sort of patch that might come in the future. Although what cards are actually going to be changed is not something that they're going to make public just yet. So we don't know what cards are actually going to change, or if these are the changes that we're going to see in the patch. But they did say that there's going to be a patch next week, which is the week of the TNE Invitational, which affects a world slot. So, yeah, I mean, decks are due on Wednesday, and maybe we're getting a patch on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Who knows?
I'm pretty sure if there's a patch, obviously Telemachus and SRFS aren't horrible human beings. They will let, the people resubmit decks if their decks are destroyed by a balance patch. So obviously is not, ideal, because you obviously rather have, not that few time to build a deck, but at least you're not going to be locked into, like say your key card becomes 20 cost or whatever. Host is going to force you to play your bad card.
Yeah, of course not.
Anyways, so let's jump right in. So the obvious big problem, the biggest problem, one that you might hear the most discussion about, is Elding. Elding is really, especially in Throne, in Expedition, it's a lot harder to make work, although it's still very, very powerful in Expedition nonetheless. But in Throne, definitely, Elding is like Dovid if Dovid didn't have any downsides and was all upside. And especially if you get that 1/4 and roll killer.
And I think it's worth mentioning that this is on top of some disgruntledness coming from the player base about Throne that has been going on for the last, I don't know how long, but because it's just I don't know, there just don't seem to be enough checks in Throne to deal with the powerful strategies. With each set that comes out, there are more powerful interactions, and decks get more and more streamlined, but there aren't really great ways of dealing with it. So people have been complaining about things like combo, whether it be Overloader or the Eccentric Officer. And I think the fact that this set doesn't really do a great job of addressing those, and also introducing new problems in Throne with Elding, I think is what's causing a lot of people to be upset.
The reason Elding is so good is it also will feed into the second point, is that in Throne there's just a lot of ways to easily throw it in the void. It's not like discarding is a bad thing either if you're playing other cards that have voided effects, or if you're playing other forms of Reanimator, and we'll get to that in a second, obviously you can play Sporefolk, mill Elding with Sporefolk, get a 4/4 that, has some battle skill on it, and then also put 4 extra cards in the bin that also might have other effects or other benefits to you. Maybe like you're playing Hourglass or you're playing Vara or whatever, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can utilize the cards in your Void and still also get this Elding. You have, Sporefolk, you have Guststrider, you have Crafty, which the influence is so much easier to do in Throne than Exped to get the Crafty influence working. You have, Darkwater Vines in both formats, but Darkwater Vines is easier to also trigger again in Throne, also because of vows, right? You can play a vow and trigger Darkwater Vines where there's no vows in Expedition. And so Elding just pops off and looks incredible. And on top of that, one of the reasons the Elding's so hard to deal with, especially on like turn 2 or 3, it produces a 4-cost 4/4, which really can't be killed by a lot of common early in-game interaction, right? Defile doesn't hit Elding. Hailstorm can't kill Elding. On top of that, decks playing Elding are also playing, in Expedition they're playing Vinegrafter, but in both events they're playing Darkwater Vines. And if you're trying to counter with some sort of aggro or like Hailstorm doesn't hit Darkwater Vines or the Pale Rider, right? And then on top of all these other problems, you also have a 1/4 chance to roll Killer, which is just really, really huge. Like, the worst case is you get a 4/4 with Deadly. That's the worst case scenario on turn 2, right?
Yeah, and if it basically invalidates whatever your opponent tried to set up if they were playing to the board if you get the one with Killer. I think the real problem with this is, like you said, this is on its way to something that's more powerful. A lot of these decks are like going into a Reanimator strategy. Well, the thing about these decks that do things that are extremely powerful is that they should have a weakness at the beginning of the game. And that's just not true, because discarding Elding early on is like the most powerful thing you can do right now. So it's a perfect storm of a lot of different problems, which is why I think Elding is giving so much people so much grief. One thing that to me is a problem is that it goes through things like Gavel or
Oh yeah,
or Embargo Officer. Like, how are you supposed to stop this? I mean, you basically have to play Grand Suppressor before your opponent gets to play their 2-drop. I think that's basically the way to deal with Elding right now, and that doesn't sound very fun.
I mean, the other way is Genetrix, right? But you have to play that, early as well. And of course, if they get a 4/4 Killer, you can also just play Elding for 5, right? Five, as it turns out, is not an unplayable amount, especially in Expedition. You can play 5 pretty easily. And of course, the other reason that Reanimator specifically is in dire straits as far as maybe metagame health is concerned, is that they also, in addition to Elding, they also printed Life for a Life, which is a 4-cost Grasping at Shadows in a deck that's already playing a bunch of, random fodder, right? If you're playing a bunch of random fodder for Elding, you're probably going to have a random thing in play to sacrifice for Life for a Life. Privilege of Rank still exists, right? Just the classic Reanimator shell that we've seen for the past 2 years. Now with Elding and Life for a Life, it's just really, really powerful. It shores up the early game. Darkwater Vines also does the same thing at shoring up the early game by just being a 2/1 region, really good versus aggro. Combine, you sort of have 8 really large early game stampedes, and then you just can utilize that to get to your late game stampede, right? You can just win early with the Melding stuff, or you can win late with the Vara stuff. It's very powerful.
Yeah. So with the patch that they've teased is going to be happening next week, do you think they're going to change Elding? Because I don't think so. I the set's only been out for
No.
a week at this point, a week and a half, and yeah, they don't change new cards very much.
They might change Elding. I think if there's any card that they would change, it's going to be Elding, because it was somewhat of a scary card to release in a sense, right? So they did take a bit of a risk releasing Elding as it was. I wouldn't be surprised if they hit Elding. I'd be surprised if they hit any other card from the set, but Elding I wouldn't necessarily be surprised about. There's a reason that we think that the internal balance patch has some relevance to what's going on, is that they hit Azendel and Vara, right?
Yeah, but I mean, even if they do change those cards, at the top end of the Reanimator strategy, it's not like there aren't other powerful things that you can do in the top end of Reanimator. Like, if you just reanimate what's the new 8-drop?
You go for Valiant, Guardian, Scourge of Frostholm, or First Flame, right? You just sort of switch your Reanimator, and it does make the deck worse, but it still makes the deck there. The only other thing I could see potentially hitting would be Life for a Life, but I don't know how you would even nerf that. You make it cost 5, then it's just a worse Grasping at Shadows then.
No, yeah, there are way too many moles to whack if you're going that route.
I mean, the big problem is just Elding, right? That's just the big problem. I think it needs to cost
Yeah.
like 3 shadow or possibly cost like 1 or 2 if it goes to the void, right? Similar to send a message, where if you discard send a message, you have to pay 2 to play it. Maybe you should have to
Yeah.
pay something to play Elding, just because
Yeah.
it is so much easier to play than Felrock. Because Felrock costing XXXYYY is so much harder to hit than Elding, which just cost Shadow Shadow.
Yeah. And I do think that is a card they should change. Like everything I've seen from it, it just seems too good in Throne. In Expedition, actually don't think it's that bad because there just aren't the tools to enable it as well. Like I don't think Sporefolk's in Expedition, right?
No, Spore Folk isn't. I don't think Gust Rider is.
Yeah.
You have like Whispering Wind and Darkwater Vines, but you don't have vows to enable Darkwater Vines as well, right? Darkwater
Yeah.
Vines obviously really needs the critical mass of discard because it only pops up once you already have discarded the card.
Yeah. And there's no like back alley delinquent, which I think is a really powerful play with Elding.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that's an issue, and I think we'll hopefully get that addressed before the Throne Open. Otherwise, this is going to be like the Jack tournament or something like that, where everyone's going to be playing slightly different versions of the same deck. So I mentioned that this was like on top of persisting bad feelings about combo and Throne, and people feeling like they don't have the tools to interact. I think like when it comes to eccentric officer, like that's kind of ridiculous because I feel like that deck is extremely fragile, and if you're targeting it, you can figure out a way to beat it. But like I think Overloader combo is one example, but there's also like Reanimator combo, just like a lot of combo decks, and there aren't a lot of tools for decks to play long games or decks to play aggressive and hope to win before they get beaten by a really powerful turn. How do you feel about combo decks in Throne right now?
I don't know. I've been most focusing on Expedition. I also haven't been playing Throne at quite as much. I mean, the real problem is if Reanimator is the big dog, what happens when Reanimator goes away? Will combo take over and swoop in with the variety of combo decks, or can aggro shut it down? Right? Because the way to beat combo is just be aggressive. Punch in with your 2/1s, and that's usually pretty decent at shutting down combo in a lot of ways. I think mock combo could be a problem. I don't think Eccentric Officer is currently a problem, although maybe it isn't. I'm just incorrect. I'm willing to believe that as well.
Yeah. I think what we need more like payoff to just having random units in play. Like Grand Suppressor or Embargo Officer are fantastic against a lot of these combo decks. Like different units are good against different combo decks, but like you still lose to Elding if they get killer,
Yeah.
or like you can't beat them in time because you're attacking with the 2/1 that doesn't have any other abilities. Like it's just not scary. I think if there were more things that rewarded having units in play in the style of like Xenan Obelisk, I think that would make it a lot better for fair decks to fight back. But considering like Xenan Obelisk is basically still the best card we have to reward someone for having a pretty wide board. I mean, it's that or Rally, and like both of those cards are unchanged since set 1, and a lot of other cards have gotten a lot more powerful since then. So like I think that if we had more ways to reward people for playing units out early, I think that that would help as far as dealing with these combo decks.
I'll have to think about that last point. I'm not super convinced that we need like a 3-cost Xenan Obelisk as the way to stop combo decks, but the way to stop combo decks should really be that don't have overpowered combo decks probably. Because especially with lack of sideboards, which I think is a good thing, it's hard to have cards that so I said like Embargo Officer, Genetrix, Grand Suppressor, right? All of those deal with different types of combo decks, right? So obviously the problem is that when you have a card that deals with a random thing, your card will good in some, bad in others. That's in part why there's so many random hate text on cards that are already good, is to give people interaction in decks because of no sideboards. I'm pretty sure that's the reason. But I think that that's ultimately fine for the game.
Yeah, I think it's good. But you need to have a reason to play these units, because right now your opponent will figure out a way around it if you're just playing units and kill you anyway. Like time is so bad right now. Somebody joked like people don't understand the win equity you get for just hitting people with teacher on turn 2. I responded with, people don't understand the win equity you lose just by having time in your deck, because that's kind of how it feels right now.
Yeah, time's in sorry shape. It's not a good spot right now, unfortunately.
Yeah. One more thing, you mentioned sideboards. We had a long conversation about that in the Discord, which I was honestly pretty annoyed by. Sideboards are very inelegant, and like I'm so glad we have markets instead of sideboards. I don't think that the reality of sideboards is good for Eternal. It's just like, it's boring waiting to figure out cards to put in and out of sideboards. Like, that's just extra time that you don't need to have when you're playing the game. I mean, like, yeah, it could be an interesting thought process, but like, it just takes up so much time where it's like not action. And also, it's very inelegant. Like, you have to decide how many cards you want in your sideboard. Like, in Magic, do you have a 4 of in your sideboard? Do you have a 2 of? Do you have a 3 of? It's just very inelegant compared to having a 5-card market of different cards.
The other reason it's inelegant is that it's like, oh, sideboards are great because it allows you to tune your matchup, whatever. But that still leaves you with this highly uninteractive game one. Whereas markets and having flexible main deck cards allow you to have these still interactive actual games instead of having to waste a game on sort of this non-game where there's just nothing going on, right? If you build your deck properly in Eternal, either you're making a concession to a matchup or you're trying to fight it through markets or other main deck cards. And I think that that's a better way to go about it.
Yeah, that's also very true. Yeah, markets are so much better than sideboards. Let's never talk about sideboards again. All right, let's talk about some of the good things that that Revelations has brought to Eternal.
Yeah, so first off, this is not a Revelations card, although in some respects it might as well be. It's a card that I've always loved, and I think I hyped up back during spoiler season, but it never really saw the light of day, although today it's finally shining, and that is the card Short Hopper, specifically an Expedition, because in Expedition, we don't really have markets anymore. We have Zoomit Coercion, which might some point see play because it's one of the best market options we have currently. And then we have the Grafters, and out of the Grafters, only Vine Grafter seems to be the one that seems to cut. Like, you sometimes see like the Fire one in like a Valkyrie's deck.
I think you shouldn't sell the Grafters short. I think that the Time Grafter is like pretty relevant because getting charge is nice. And like the Fire one being a Valkyrie is pretty relevant as well.
Those are relevant, but like, so I don't know if you remember, Sunny, but back in the day when Grafters were first built, I was like, these cards are great. They're wonderful. I love them. They're going to see so much play. And then you're like, they're bad. Stormblessed, have you seen how much they cost? They're 2/2s for 2 that have you pay 3. They're like 5 cost purchases. They're really bad. And I was like, they're great. And now the shoe's on the other foot. I'm like, they're just really bad. Like, go marketless. And you're like, no, they're fine. Like, Vine Grafter, I think, is the most acceptable. I think Speed Grafter is not acceptable. Fire one's okay in a Valkyrie's deck because of Valkyrie Warp. Especially if you're playing 3 faction Valkyries, where you're playing, like 12 or more Valkyrie Warp cards, and having the extra Valkyrie with, having the utility of the market's pretty useful. Decay is also pretty useful at fighting upwards. But anyway, so markets, they're at their worst they've ever been since they were introduced to the game. And that means a card like Short Hopper, which needs you to have market slots, is now better than it's ever been. Especially with a format that hopefully maybe is a little bit slower. Maybe if Elding is, maybe taken out of the format. I don't know, other combos are existing, whatever. But Short Hopper being, this flexible card, if you're playing a 3-faction deck with Send a Message, or even just a 2-faction deck, you get Icy Gaze or Privilege of Rank. Having the split card of being a 6/4 that draws you a power, right? You play Privilege of Rank, you play like one Justice Sigil main deck. That's all you play main deck. It's just like one Justice Sigil. And Short Hopper turns into like a chunky Amber Acolyte. That's pretty good. Or it's a 4/4 flying, Frosty Frostkin. And that's really good. And then Send a Message is kind of okay. It's 6 cost for a 4/4 flyer that makes your opponent discard a card and sack a unit. That's okay if you're playing a 3-faction deck. But yeah, Short Hopper is really cool right now, and I love the card.
So one of the coolest uses I've seen of it is to put huge spells in the void and then get them back with it's Davia, right? The 7 cost. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Which side of the fence are you? Do you think it's better just as a utility card or as something that can set up a Davia later in the game?
I think it's better as both. If you're playing 2 or 3-faction Davia, you play 2 or 3 of the voided spells where you just discard them. And then finally, your other 2 spells are like an Expedition. You have like, Align the Tesseract or Channel the Tempest, right? Or something like that. Because what do you do? Have a selection of 5 expensive spells? Like, how are you going to want to like select it? Like, I think this expensive spell will do the correct job at this situation. No. You have a big thing. You have some card draw. Maybe you have, a big board clear or something, right? You don't really need more than 3 choices for expensive spells. And maybe not even more than 2. So the other 2 or 3 slots can be filled with your utility, right? The first Short Hopper will usually be that utility card, unless you have Davia in hand. And then the second one will be for that, big card, especially since the first Short Hopper allows you to play Davia, right? Davia costs 7. 7's a lot. So having the ability to get power to get to 7 is better than throwing the card in the bin right away, because Davia is still fine if you're just, playing it to kill something or, some other spell that's already in your main deck, right? So you don't necessarily need to play that big spell to make Davia good. It just becomes insane once you can also do the short hopper thing. So yeah, short hopper is really good. Fun, interesting card. I like it a lot. Next card that ended up being a lot better than I thought it was going to be. Me and Sunny agree. This card looked pretty good on the whole, but it ended up looking really good. And that is Ambitious Mandavia, the 5-cost 5/5 for 5 Shadow Mandrake with lifesteal that says summon, you may kill an enemy unit, and then Ambitious Mandavia gets -X equal to that unit stats. And there's less big things going on, and so Ambitious Mandavia, often is a 3/3, 4/2, 2/4, stuff like that. It's just pretty good with that stat line.
Yeah, and of course, being able to recur it, if that's what you're doing in Mandrakes, is pretty nice. I mean, it's actually kind of hard to do that. Like, Shoal Stirrings is nice, but I tried building a Shoal Stirrings deck. It's just awkward in a few aspects of it because there aren't enough Mandrakes that you want to play that really work with it. But definitely enjoying playing the 5/5. I think it's a really good card, and I think we're going to see it in a lot of decks, especially ones that want to prolong the game.
Absolutely.
The next on the list is a card that, well, I knew it was going to be insane, and I think I don't know if people have noticed en masse yet, but I definitely have. Is Bottled Insight. It's really good. It either cycles or does something busted, and having those two options is just fantastic. I've been playing it in Overloader. I've been getting it off of Dovid, and it's good every time.
Yeah, if there's a reason that people aren't playing Bottled Insight, it's that Eternal players are the greediest card game players in the world. I say this with love, but I think one of the reasons that Daryl prints cards like Blueprints and Chance and Contrabands and other cards like that are that people were super greedy and never played Seek Power, never played more than 25 power in their deck. Daryl wanted to encourage better deck building, so to speak. And also, I think those cards are just fine to print well. Like, they're also just great designs in general. And I'm sort of being a little bit facetious about this, but I think there's an element of that. People like putting as many of their cards they want to play as possible. And obviously, playing a card like Bottled Insight in some sense can feel like playing a Seek Power. Instead of Bottled Insight, you can play another card that you love, right? So I think there's a bit of I want to play more cards that I enjoy. And instead of realizing that, maybe with Bottled Insight, especially like maybe a control deck or whatever, you're also gaining the ability of just having much more consistency. I think we'll see more Bottled Insights once some bigger tournaments have happened and there's more net decking of these tournaments going on.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's just so great. I forgot to mention that I've been using it to discard like Felrock or Elding also. That's a thing that I can do. So it's just fantastic. The next card is a fun one, although the jury's still out for me, and that's Malaga's Amphitheatre. That's the Praxis site that lets you replenish power if you hit them. I'd learned the hard way that you don't just gain maximum power. So you can't go from 3 to 4. You can use 2 power when you're at 3 to go down to 1 power for the turn, and then you can get back up to 3. You can't go above your maximum power with this. So yeah, I think that this card has been pretty good for me in some situations. Like if you play it on turn 2 off of a logistics expert, then you daring maneuver your logistics expert, and then you get 2 power to use on your turn anyway. Then it's really good. But there are also situations where your opponent just has a bigger board than you and it doesn't really interact with their board. But man, against control decks or combo decks, it's just really good because you get to slow them down and you get a little bit of extra value. And eventually you might get Diogo.
It's really cool because it's the first truly aggressive site we've seen, right? Maybe Endless Steps might also become an aggressive. I mean, it is also an aggressive site, but I haven't seen that one as much. It's really cool design. It doesn't feel like it's overpowered. It does a lot of interesting things to the gameplay, right? It has a super unique passive of regenerating your power, replenishing it. I don't know if you remember the site Denivore Deals has a spell on it that says a flying unit gets +2/+2 and overwhelm. This site has a spell and it says a unit gets +2/+2 and overwhelm. It's got spells that aren't overpowered. There's no spell in Amphitheatre that just straight up draws you a card, right? There's no card advantage from Amphitheatre. And yet it has 3 spells that all feel very impactful to play, right? There's no sort of dud spell in Amphitheatre. I think that's really cool. This one manages to combine all the aspects of sites that I love into a package that doesn't seem overpowered, and I think the card plays really well, actually. Speaking of cards that play really well, we have Houndmaster, the Ungol Houndmaster, 2 and a fire for a quick draw Valoring Soldier, that if you attack with 2 units, you can pay power equal to the amount of cards in your hand, and then you get a 4/4 that's attacking as well. And this card has really impressed me. I was not as high on this card as a lot of people, and I'm willing to admit that I was wrong about this card. I didn't think the card was bad. I was like, the card's probably playable. You'll probably put it in your deck because there's probably nothing else to play. But the card's really good and might even be really throne playable because it has the power level, it has the potential to get there. Really powerful card.
Yeah, it works well with Malaga Amphitheatre. Like, if you can empty your hand faster, you can get the 4/4 faster. And I've enjoyed this card in aggressive decks, and yeah, I think it's really good.
Those are just some of the interesting cards that we've currently been, playing around with in the new set. As always, there's always more to play around with, right? This is just a small selection of them. So moving on, there are 2 big upcoming tournaments to be aware of that I hope you will all either be participating in or, watching on the sideline and enjoying watching some high-level Eternal. We have the Tuesday Night Eternal Winter Invitational on June 5th, and we will
Spring
have...
Invitational?
Is it spring? I thought spring was... Oh,
Yeah.
it might be spring. Probably spring. Yeah, you're right. It was never before. Anyways, Spring Invitational, whatever. I said June 5th. That's all I need to know. Anyways, more importantly, we have Sunny. Sunny's going to be participating on June 5th, so show up and support Sunny. Otherwise, we have the Throne Open on June 10th to 12th, where, obviously for that one, it's an open tournament, so anyone can show up. And I hope to see a lot of you there. And it should be a great time for both tournaments. I plan on watching the Invitational. I plan on participating in the Throne Open.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting another crack at trying to qualify for Worlds, especially starting out in the top 16. Yeah, it's back-to-back weekends of tournaments. I love having that, as long as it's not followed by more back-to-back weekends of tournaments, so I have a little bit of time to recharge. All right, let's talk about the TNE Invitational. So TNE number 11 was won by Mail with AP Kai, which is probably the weirdest deck we've seen win one of these. Like, it's using a card that I still think is unplayable. Like, I think the deck was good for the tournament, but I think that's the last we're going to see of Kai Awakened Master.
Wait.
5 cost, 3/6 stealth.
Wait, the card that you thought was the weirdest in the deck was Kai and not Ayur? Mail was playing 4 Ayurs.
Okay, yeah, Ayur was super duper weird too. 4 Ayurs in a Argenport deck that has no way of playing it.
I don't know if you watched it, but there's a clip where late in the game, Mail flips 7/7 flying regen Ayur off the bottom of his deck after giving his whole deck, regen and flying from Kai earlier. It's a crazy moment, and it's just ridiculous that he put 4 Ayurs in his deck, and that ended up, being really good.
Yeah, I think this is the weirdest deck to have won a TNE, but, good for Mail. Congratulations. Definitely proved a lot of people wrong, including myself.
There was a lot of, send a messages going around, right? When people are playing a lot of send a message, then Ayurs obviously is a lot better, right? Because it's in your hand, or, discarded from, Dark Water Vines or whatever, right? You can play it for free. So it was a metagame call, and it definitely paid off.
I suppose so. I don't really have words for it. Anyway, I think the coolest thing that the deck did was playing Kai and then attacking with the Moldermook on the same turn in order to get the Kai's Blessing immediately. That was pretty cool. I don't know. That deck is still like a mystery to me. Anyway, TNE number 12 was won by Ambivalent Thoughts on a much more stock list of Valkyries. I expect to see Valkyries in the Expedition portion of the Invitational. I don't know that there's much to be said about the Valkyrie Warp deck, is there?
No, it's Valkyrie Warp. It's got Deathwing, it's got Sire's Tower, it's got Heavy Artillery, probably. Notably, Ambivalent Thoughts taking down the tournament was actually already qualified for a slot because they are the number 1 seed. They have the most points, and they were already qualified through the wildcard system, but they instead decided that, wildcard slot was too beneath them. So they took it upon themselves to take a true slot for themselves, opening up a 4th wildcard slot for someone else.
Yeah. And so the 16 players that will be playing at the TNE Invitational next weekend is going to be Ambivalent Thoughts, Apple Chips, Roshi, Aromanoma, Spifferific, The Overmaster, Mail, Reason, Hey YU, I'm Straight, Doc28, Canada, myself, Portich, Pleasing Sky 4, and Earth's Overseer. A good field, but I hope they all lose aside from myself because I want that world slot.
Yeah, this is a pretty stacked field. Obviously, you've seen a number of these players, especially the people closer to the top, have participated in multiple TNEs, so you've seen them perform well throughout the whole season. And they're names that, if you've done a lot of ECQs or you've paid attention to a lot of ECQs, you might recognize them from various tournaments, mid-top 64s.
Yeah. Anyway, jokes aside, I am definitely looking forward to next week for some high-level competition, some best of 3s. It's going to be 3 rounds of Expedition followed by 3 rounds of Throne. It's going to be all on Saturday, so all on June 5th. So it's actually a pretty short tournament, but I suppose it's basically just a top 16 playing out. And yeah, I'm going to bring my A game. Hopefully, I hope.
To round off this episode of FECast, we're going to be doing something a little bit fun today. I've brought 3 and Sunny's brought 1. We've brought somewhat, for me, they're mostly untested. I have fun little casual expedition brews, all trying to do something unique that I really haven't seen on Ladder that much, and trying to avoid, the classic discarding things and stuff. Classic other cards like Renahen and Crafty Occultist and, Elding Shenanigans. And so these are exclusive untested brews for me. They are going to be unlisted on Eternal Warcry, so they're super exclusive. Get them now!
Yeah, and this is basically Stormblessed's way of saying that these brews are not that great, but they are technically exclusive. That's true.
Yes. I mean, I think they're okay. I think they're good enough to win some games. They're not going to be tier 1. They're probably fun to play. So the first brew on my docket is a Xenan Midrange deck. I kind of wanted to try taking Xenan for a spin. I've played 5 games with it and went 4-1. And I was like, yeah, that's solid enough for me. 5-game sample size in Gold 2. Good job, Xenan deck.
I am shaking my head right now.
Basically, the Xenan deck is playing, classic Xenan stuff. It's playing a 3/3 split of the 5-cost stealth units to just get some cool stealth value to, psych out your opponent. It's playing 4 Ambitious Mandevilla and to get some cool removal. The cool part is it's playing Logistics Expert and Open Way Supplier as ways to ramp and, get value later in the game, right? Open Way Supplier is really cool in this deck because it works with basically everything. Vinegrafter is kind of its shakiest card aside from Open Way Supplier itself. But even with Vinegrafter, right, 2/2 killing regen, still not bad, right? It's got regen, so at least it gets to survive the killing attack. And on every other hit in the deck, just Expert with Killer is actually not as terrible as you think. And a cool synergy with Open Way Supplier is Yavin, the Steel Crest, because if you give Yavin Killer, so you play Yavin and attack with it with Killer immediately, and it immediately becomes a 4/4. And that means Yavin more likely to kill something and more likely to sire through opponent's removal. And so this is just playing a number of cool Xenan cards.
For everyone else that's confused, that's Yavin with a J. I would have assumed that this is Javen or something.
Probably.
I don't know. You love your soft J's. I know that.
I don't know why. At this point, I really can't help it. Jarl, Yavin,
Anyway, I actually have been really impressed by Javin, whatever. Oh, we never talked about this promo, but I've been pretty impressed by it. Like, it pumping the rest of your units after you play them is pretty nice. And if you've got power to sink into it, it can really generate cards and power because it can play them for free. So I've liked this card a lot.
I mean, if you look at Tovon, this card draws cards at a more efficient rate than Tovon.
Yeah, that's true.
You look at, what was that old card? Burden. This card draws cards at a similar rate to Burden. Burden plays things a little different. Like this card plays anything that costs 4 or less. Burden plays if it's a just purely multi-faction, right? So there's a bit of trade-off there. But this has the other upside of being a 3-cost 3/3, and that's just a pretty solid stat line.
Yeah.
If it dies to 2-power removal spell, you're not super shook up about it, right? You did come off of the exchange a little bit poorly, but it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, it's I think it's most comparable to Ramba, and I think it compares unfavorably for like its immediate impact, but favorably for its prolonged impact. So I think this is a good card. Depending on what the game looks like, what the metagame looks like, I think it could or could not see play. It really depends on how easy it is to remove.
My second brew is actually a bit more tested than my first brew. This is an updated list from last Expedition cycle, which I almost took to a tournament, although I think I ended up taking a different deck to Expedition tournament. But this deck, this is Sentinels, otherwise I like to call it draft cards, because it looks like it's just a bunch of cards that should only be played in draft, because it's probably a bunch of cards that should only be played in draft. It's playing Bastion Gatekeeper, it's playing Power Cell, Relay Point, Controlled Demolition, Laser Blast. It looks like a bunch of cards that are only draft playable. And this card is now being updated with a couple copies of Blitzstone and Customs Edition to try out some cool interactions. Blitzstone, of course, is the coolest card of the deck because it combines really well with Forge Sanitizer and Fort Smasher, either, to get a 6/5 flying regen right off the bat to charging your opponent, or Fort Smasher can get a quick hit in on your opponent before they realize what's going on, that they might need to have left back a blocker or even played a blocker down. Beyond that, the deck is trying to use, like Auto Tread to get value, and Volk with Relics. Volk is really powerful, especially with Controlled Demolition. And Controlled Demolition is actually a really powerful trick on cards like Volk, Fort Smasher, and Forge Sanitizer. And even Auto Tread. You put a Controlled Demolition on Auto Tread, suddenly now, you're getting charged for free instead that also pump Auto Tread that can then, attack the opponent with double damage as like a 7/7. So This deck's really cool, has some really good play. Probably one of the most important things to note about this deck is that with Okessa's Audience and Bastion Gatekeeper, you should be plundering for power basically every time because the deck's only playing 25 power, so you're going to likely need the extra power. And on top of that, you're going to need to get influence with those two. And it's eminently doable, and the deck's really fun, and I recommend trying it out.
Yeah, this one looks like it has a lot of good ideas. I'm really sketchy on playing the third faction for 2 cards, like for 2 multi-faction cards that you want to play early in the game. But I mean, obviously Volk is an incredible card, and if you can figure out how to get that card in play, you're usually pretty happy. I was thinking about what would happen if you played this as a 2-faction deck, as just a Rakano deck, because I love the interaction of Blitzstone into either Fort Smasher or Forge Sanitizer. I think both of those are fantastic. Like Blitzstone into attacking for 7 in the air, or Blitzstone into playing a Fort Smasher and hitting them, and being able to play a unit from the top of your deck. So a lot of cool things going on here. Yeah.
Yeah, if you were going to go to Rakano, I think you would play the Drifting Drone. I know that sounds weird to say, like, I'm going to play the Drifting Drone without this, but I think you would go into a harsher Relics option instead. You might play Bullet Blaster, Rocket Blaster. Yeah, you'd play like Rocket Blaster, and you'd go into some Relics that way, and you'd play like a Relic weapon or two to help fuel the Drifting Drone.
Does that work? Isn't it non-weapon?
No, but it works for Drifting Drone and it works for Rocket Blaster. It wouldn't work for Forge Sanitizer.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then the key,
Right.
of course, going with Rocket Blaster would also be cool because Controlled Demolition on Rocket Blaster would start dealing 6 damage a pop, right? So that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
The key is if you're taking out the Volk, you really want to include 1 or 2 more good options for Controlled Demolition, right? Because with just Forge Sanitizer and Fort Smasher and potentially Auto Tread, that's really not quite enough because, well, Forge Smasher's not that great with Controlled Demo. It's okay, and it's, you want to keep it alive and you want to push the damage or you want to, trade off things, but it's not as good as it is on Auto Tread and Forge Sanitizer and Volk, right? So without Volk, you're really down to just 2 good hits and like 1 okay hit. So you really want to pump up the numbers again. But I think that Rakano could be a decent option as well.
What if you just play a Justice Market with the Justice Grafter, which is a Sentinel? Okay.
Justice
Fine,
the plate
whatever.
I have played so much Plate Grafter in a deck like this back in old Expedition. Maybe the new format's better, right? Cards changed based on the format, right? So it's possible Plate Grafter's better, but like Plate Grafter has been just like complete garbage every time I've played it, every deck.
Yeah, I feel like this deck, you'd want it to be base Rakano and then just have a late game way of getting a time source for some things like, what's the card that gets back a Relic and a Sentinel Restorative Process? Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
And Volk, because those are just powerful cards in this deck.
No, I agree. I tried building a Restorative Process version of the deck. The problem is, of course, we don't have like Blazing Salvo, right? The only way to get Restorative Process would be either play it main deck, which seems a little iffy, although probably not the worst idea of the world, or Speed Graph, which is obviously pretty bad. So if you wanted to play Plate Grafter in a deck like this, it would obviously be a very different deck, right? You're not playing time at that point. You'd at least put like Pisto in the market, but the deck does not get to high power, especially with cards like Auto Tread and Custom Munitions. Getting to 6 seems like a heavy ask. So I don't necessarily know, but anyways, I think this deck is really cool, and there are options in all versions of these decks, right? Especially because I've left some things open for modifications for your own edification, right? I put a couple 1 and 2-ofs to be like, hey, you can make the deck your own. Anyways, so last exclusive deck list is it's a cute little deck that I thought might have been cool from seeing some spoilers. This one, in a sense, is the haziest of the 3. I think this one is likely the worst, but also in some ways the most interesting. This is a Stonescar aggro deck, but it's a Stonescar Relic aggro deck. So it's trying to utilize Relic sacrifice synergies to generate an advantage and kill your opponent that way, right? It's playing Dianglo Strongman because it's a 4/1 that's aggressive, but also when it dies, it creates a free relic that can then be sacrificed. Reappropriator is cute because you can steal a relic and then sacrifice it in the future. Sanguine Reaper, yeah, if you're sacrificing relic, you might have the relic in play, but if you have the relic, you have Sanguine Reaper. This deck uses blueprints to its most effectiveness in a sense. If you're getting that free relic, you're going to be very happy to have it. It's playing 7 sketches because in Stonescar, all the sketches cost 3 to play a relic, right? They're super cheap comparatively, right? You're not playing 5 to play a relic, you're only paying 3. On top of that, it's still playing Blitzstone because Blitzstone's cool. It's using Relic Feeder and Rocket Blaster to sacrifice things and recycle. Although after playing a few games, I think Recycle might be the worst part of the deck. That might be should be replaced by something else. And then it is playing Elding. I know I did say I'm trying to get away from Elding, but this deck is trying to use Elding in a very different way than every other deck in the format, in any format, because it's trying to sacrifice relics. And the only way it has to actually discard the Elding and not just play it straight up is with a 2 of Auto Tread. While it's kind of me sketching a little bit on my conditions of not playing Elding, I think it's ultimately fine because it's using it very differently than every other deck. The deck's cool. It's got a number of 1 of relics just to play around with, and again, you can update the deck as you would wish with all these 1 and 2 and 3 ofs.
Yeah, I think this deck's too cute. I think like you're better off just playing a straight Stonescar deck.
Yeah, but like I don't necessarily always play to like, have the highest win rate, right? Like sometimes I play to have fun, and sometimes having fun means building the best version of a deck, right? Like this is not trying to be a Stonescar aggro deck, it's trying to be a Stonescar Relic aggro deck. My goal is always to build the best version of an archetype. It's really fun. It's fun and cute. I'm gonna maintain that it's fun and cute.
Okay. All right. Well, I also have one exclusive deck. Actually, is this exclusive? Did I post this in the Discord? Oops. Might not be actually exclusive.
Wow.
But this updated version is exclusive because the one that I posted before didn't have Javan. Okay, so this is a Praxis deck. It tries to get out Amphitheater and make that card good. It's definitely good against like slow decks because you can go turn 1 Logistics Expert into Amphitheater and give your Logistics Expert +2 attack and then play a 2-drop. It's got some aggressive elements like Houndmaster and Stonehammer, but yeah, this one definitely has a bit of an identity crisis of what it wants to do. But man, Amphitheater and Shoal Custodian are just absolute insane cards, and Power Cell's good too. So like, there's a lot of good stuff in Praxis. Is it good enough? This one's really rough around at the edges, but I think there are some good things going on here, and I think that a modification of this might be a legitimate choice to bring to a tournament. In the expedition tournaments that we're definitely going to have. It's definitely a legitimate choice to play on ladder. Okay, let's put it that way.
Yeah, cards like Thunderfish Striker are really cool. That card is a new card. It's a 2-cost 2/2 Valor, and it's a 2/2 on the first hit. But anytime after it's the enemy player, it becomes a 4/4. So it works pretty well also with Malong Amphitheater, right? If you just curve Striker and Amphitheater, you are likely to get that first hit in, whether or not you give this +2/+2 and Overwhelm to overwhelm damage through, or just Mind Fire, make your opponents able to block, right? So then once you get the first hit in, it's now a 4/4 forever, and a 4/4 Valor is very hard to block. And of course, Houndmaster's, as stated earlier, Houndmaster's really good with Amphitheater. It's also just a really good card in general, but with Amphitheater, you dump out your whole hand, and then you get to Houndmaster for cheap, and cheap and early is key there. The cards that I think are the sketchiest in this deck, Apprentice Mage and Speed Grafter, are the sketchiest. I don't exactly know what I would swap them out for, but like if I was looking to try to tune this deck, that's where I might start. Maybe those end up being correct options, right? That's also possible, right? Sometimes you look at a deck, you think, maybe I should swap this card out, and then you're like, well, actually, no. But I think the exercise of considering what to swap out is, I think, still useful, and that's where I would start if I was looking at trying to put the deck. Another interesting potential, just quick swap if you want to make that, would be Deacon Blitz for Hellfire Valkyrie, depending on your goals, especially if you're playing Speed Grafter. Hellfire Valkyrie is actually a lot better than I thought it would be. I've been watching a bunch of my teammate Avion sometimes, and he really loves Hellfire Valkyrie, and that card's really impressed me whenever I've seen it. So
yeah, Deacon Blitz has not been good. I'll tell you another card that hasn't been good is Praxis Blueprints. I have not gotten the Relic. Like, I think I got the Relic maybe once, but for some reason, it's really hard to get triple of both factions and before playing something like a Blueprint. So I think like that tells me that Blueprints might not be as good as we thought they were, at least in decks like this. One other thing I want to say is that Speedcrafter actually having some cards with charge is kind of a big deal with Houndmaster because you need to be able to make sure you can get the 2 attackers on time. So I don't know if Speedcrafter is the best card for that, but I do think that you want cards with charge if you're playing Houndmaster, if you can have it, because then it makes it a lot easier to make sure that you can get in that attack with 2 units.
If you switch the Heat Blitz for Hellfire Valkyrie, obviously Speedgrafter does get a lot better, right? Because getting Hellfire Valkyrie charges is a pretty big game there, just by itself.
That's also big.
And also you have Javen now, right? Getting Javen charge is not the greatest thing ever, but like, it does become a 4/4 with charge. And, as you said, with Houndmaster, having that just extra bit of charging 4/4 action could be decent enough.
Well, it becomes a 5/5 because it gets the +1/+1 bonus, and then it attacks, making itself a 5/5. Yeah, so it's pretty cool.
I was stacking the bonuses, but I added them up wrong in my head. But yeah, so I think Speedcrafter's probably fine in the deck, although, still expensive. I think Apprentice Mage, though, is probably where I would look to start. And Blueprints. Praxis is a
Yeah.
really fun deck. It's a good archetype, I think. It's actually a pretty reasonable archetype. I don't think it's terrible. I think that there's just other things that exist that kind of keep it down, and it's a little bit off from being where it needs to be. Like Elding is still very good. Darkwater Vines is still very good. And, various combo and big, like Argentport decks can kind of help keep it in check.
All right, well, that's all we got for today. I hope you enjoyed this cast. We would like to give a big shout out to our patrons at patreon.com. These people support FECast and make sure that we can continue this podcast. Man, I should have thought that through better. Anyway, huge shout out to Odsos, Pruibin, Cotillion, Alcide Bava, Work Done Son, Camille, Crissier, D-Dub, and Yeast Out for their continued support of FECast. If you'd like to help support us, you can go to patreon.com/Friends of Eternal. Also, a big shout out to SRFS, our editor, especially after last week editing that gigantic monstrosity and getting out quickly. All right. Thank you for listening. Tell your friends about how wonderful this podcast is so that we have more people to talk about Eternal to. And until next time, we will see you in the friend zone. The Friends of Eternal Discord is the best place on the internet to get better at Eternal. We have players of all skill and experience levels all happy to help each other out on basically any aspect of their Eternal gameplay. And making all this possible is our generous patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support FECast or Friends of Eternal, consider donating at patreon.com/Friends of Eternal. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, we'll see you in the Friend Zone.